Out here introducing another wine. This is a very special bottle. This was one of the last vintages from our estate vineyard, which was along the McCallum there when we were planning on building our winery way back before we acquired Lockford. And this was our head prune Syrah. It's a very special bottle of wine because every once in a while in the cellar, we're thinking like, hey, we got lots of time during harvest. This is gonna be an easy one. They never are easy, but we start thinking like, hey, let's be creative. Let's do something a little bit different. And one of the items that Marie and I talked about was, let's do a whole cluster fermentation and let's try to do native yeast. Native yeast is it's that film that you see on the outside of grapes when they come in. It's kind of like a white gray powder on the outside. That is natural yeast that has landed on the outside of those grape berries, and it's just there waiting to start. So we crushed part of this production and destemmed it into macro bins, and then we didn't inoculate. We didn't add any outside yeast. We just allowed that grape yeast that came in with the grapes to do the fermentation. So it's a slower start, and what you get out of that is you get a broader mix of bacteria and yeast that are working in that must before the actual fermentation gets going. And that kind of contributes some more earthy aromatics to it, but it also exemplifies some of the fruity aromas. So you get these very high fruit notes as well in this. The whole clusters, on the other hand, also contribute something because there's tannins and there's texture that come out of the stems of the grapes themselves. And those typically are not present when we're doing a regular destemmed fermentation. So that little bit of greenness, and sometimes there's almost a cinnamony note that comes in on those, that contributes as well, and it also adds a freshness to the wine that is really interesting. Those whole clusters as well contribute a fruitiness. So if you think about a fermentation, most of the grape activity that's happening with exposure to oxygen, that's blowing off some of that fruit inside each one of those berries. It's like a balloon, and the fermentation is happening with no oxygen content to it. It's happening inside that little balloon, and that is really, really hyper fruity stuff. So on the top of the nose, it's violet, but it's got this savoriness too. There's an underlying, like that Syrah kind of earth expression, and some small amounts of like forest and blackberry, like fruit is just overloaded spiciness to it. There's almost like a black peppery note there as well. You can spend a lot of time smelling this. This is one of the great things about having these seeded tastings out here. You can line these out and you can keep going back to this and watching it change in your glass. I know many of you at home, as well as I do, I love opening a bottle of wine and kind of letting it go through. And over time, you're going back to it. You know, you're talking, you're watching TV, you're hanging out, and you go back and you're like, wow, where'd that come from? It's a totally unique wine in that. This was another micro lot, only about 100 cases produced, and very, very interesting. I really encourage you guys to try it out. It's not something that's going to be our regular routine of production, so enjoy it while you can. It's our Syrah from our estate previous vineyard. Big tannin texture, but nice and soft, and really nice supporting acidity there. You guys are going to love this bottle of wine. Just killer.